the main.
The other one tracked it last night.
Yeah.
I don't know if that works. But we'll see. We'll find out.
Yeah.
Yes, but
This isn't like two-way. I shouldn't be like looking for mountains people or typing some box somewhere.
I mean, it could actually. We could do that. Hey, yeah, we can actually do that here. Streams working. Oh, that's from last night.
Yeah. I guess we'll see.
Yeah, if anyone actually joins it, that'd be kind of cool.
Okay.
So
We'll
do that. All right. I'm gonna load up
We're gonna
the.
swap over.
Yeah.
This.
Well, I want to switch to. I want to switch to.
The shouting was a little unnecessary.
No. Why does it do that?
Out of full screen.
Yeah, I got a full screen. Let's switch back to the other slides. I was gonna use new slides today, but
Okay. We're
they're just new.
back here.
Yeah.
Sorry. Green short.
That's right. Okay. Let's start. Pause that. Yeah. Is that right now? I'll do a. All right. Good evening, everybody. We're going to get started here with our event. Before James starts, I'm going to say a few words. I'm going to use the clicker. I think it works.
It should work.
Yeah, it works on this. Who's here for the first time at Code's Platinum? Cool. There are 6 new people. That's great. Welcome. I hope you enjoyed this evening, and I hope you'll come out to more events. Hopefully, James's presentation will excite you, and you'll meet new people, and you'll learn the awesome benefits of coming out to these events. While you're here, respect our venue and respect each other. Do not go through the desks over here, and obey our code of conduct. On the final Monday of each month, we do a thing called Build Night. I believe it will be scheduled for here this month. Sometimes we do it at IBM, sometimes we do it at other places, but here this month. The idea is that we get a lot of people in a room, like in the background here. We get some food, and people bring projects, or a desire to learn, or a desire to teach, or just want to find something new to work on. And we get food, we get all those people together, we make announcements of what we're trying to get out of that night, and then we spend a few hours together just working on code and talking about unique problems that we're facing. We do that on the last Monday of every month. In addition to that on the last Monday, we try to do a social event every month. We're a little bit behind, but I believe the first Monday of August we're doing a board game night. So if you want to come out and get to know people in the community, that's a great way to do it.
Is that here?
I think so. I think it is. If you'd like to present to our audience, you can easily do so. You have something awesome to share. You may not know what it is, but you do know something that people are interested in hearing about. If you can think of what that is, shake your head, and figure it out. You can go to codespy.co/speakers, and there's a form there. Just fill it out with a few sentences, and we'll get you on the schedule, and you'll be able to develop it into a talk. We're looking for about 30 to 40 minutes worth of content, and if you're not prepared to give that much of a presentation, you can do a 10 to 15 paired with someone else. So we're always looking for presenters. This is rolling, and we're currently scheduling for September and October. So do so a few months before you want to speak. We've had about 190 some events, and we're 2,300 members strong. In the first 2 years of our existence, we're super happy, and we want to continue doing events that are powered by you. So present and tell your friends about the events. Tell them to come out, join our community. The talk is just a catalyst to meet someone new and learn from them. When the talk's over, say, what do you think about that census data stuff that he said? And meet someone new, and you never know where that will help develop your career or meet a new friend. Does everyone here have a ticket for abstraction? Who has one? What? That's 3. That's not nearly enough. Well, 1,200 other people agree with those 3. We're putting on a conference next month down at David L. Lawrence Convention Center. And we're bringing in some of the biggest names in software to just have a coming together of great ideas. We're bringing in great names like Jeffrey Zeltman, who's really fantastic in the design world, and Richard Stallman, who's really strong in software. What other disciplines we got? We got more design, more discipline, and we got some business type leadership. Rafi Krikorian, who led Twitter's product team. So we've got a really all-star lineup. We're bringing all these minds together and putting their perspectives into one room and seeing what happens. We have 110 sessions, and it is about to go up $25 in price. It's only $250, which is extremely reasonable for this type of event. We're about 1/3 the price of most events of this size. So get your ticket before they go up $25 at abstractions.io. Follow us on Twitter. Tonight's event will be live streamed, assuming no technical difficulties. We'll post the video there when it's done. You can review it, send it to a friend, try to hear your question that you asked, things like that. And we have more videos on our YouTube channel. That link doesn't work yet. I just redid these slides pretty recently. That link does. codeandsupply.co/chat. We have a Slack team of about 400 members. It's a great way to get into the community without being too active. You can passively kind of sit in there and meet some new people. John's in there. You're in the Slack, right? Jim's in there. If you completely disagree with what Jim says tonight, you can take it out on him tomorrow in the Slack chat. Or you can just say, great talk last night. Because we're a positive community. Join at codeandsupply.co/chat. Store is also another URL that does not work. But if you go to codeandsupply.co, there is a merchandise link on it. You can buy CSS corgis and for programmers and shirts for the conference, shirts for Code Supply. These will be up next week-ish, depends. And we're a sponsored organization. We do this. We're able to do this through sponsorship. This month, we're sponsoring ourselves with the conference. We want you to go to that conference, so we're giving that sponsorship slot to ourselves, so you can hear more about it. If your company is interested in helping support this community or just advertising to our very large and highly devoted and targeted audience, go to codesupply.co/sponsors and buy a monthly package. So that's all I've got to say. And now Jim's going to tell us about the census data.
Yeah.
Cool. Round of applause for Jim, please. That was a walk-off.
So,
here to talk about census data, how it's organized, how to use it, caveats in using it, and just some of my experiences in using it to work with some of the advocacy groups in the city. So the census was it's established in the Constitution, where by law we have to count everyone in the country every 10 years. And one of the things I find interesting about this is the census is only supposed to count everyone. That's all they're supposed to do. I feel like they're one of the most successful, if not the only time, people are glad that a government agency has overreached its original mandate. They do a lot of stuff now. They collect a lot of additional information while they take that enumeration, and they give it out to everyone for free. It's really great, and if you do any type of political science or economics, you'll find that you'll be working in another country and there's just a complete lack of geographic information, a complete lack of population information, even basic rough counts for different areas. And it's extremely useful for us to have this in this country. Like, our government basically runs on this. Decisions are made on this data, like almost exclusively sometimes. So it's a wealth of information, but it needs to be used with care. There are some problems with it that I'll address, and there are just some caveats, as you would expect with any super large data set like this. Some things I'll talk about is how it's organized geographically. So this is a count of people that exist in some geographic space. So they organize it and build up until you get to the whole country. The different types of surveys that you're most likely to associate with the census, and what that means, what kind of data is in them, where to find this data, other data that the census puts out, and some tools for using and looking at this information. So the first is geographic hierarchy. Good, that should be readable. So at the top here, we have the whole country broken into regions, those aren't used too often. Then we come down to states. And inside of states, there are counties. Inside the counties, there are census tracts, census block groups, and then blocks. So inside the counties, there are also voting districts, county subdivisions, which are what we normally think of as municipalities. So Pittsburgh would be a county subdivision. McDonald is actually 2 county subdivisions because it straddles 2 county lines. And then going up here to the state, inside the state is school districts, because school districts can cross municipal boundaries. This chart, you'll find this in a lot of places. It's in the technical documentation for the census. It's really handy, like, until you get a feel for the organization hierarchy of things. But in general, the Census Bureau tries to keep it in line with what we think of. Like, when you think of a school district, it spans municipalities. You're not normally dealing with, individual things that represent the same, like, actual entity, but, are split over political boundaries. They try to be sensible when they do these breakups.
Before you leave the slide, I have a question. Including in those regions, or FEMA regions, because some of the regions say...
I believe the FEMA regions are different.
Okay.
Yes. Why would anyone want to use the same definitions as the thing that counts everyone, right? That's another thing. My hearing is terrible, so if you got a question, you're going to have to yell at me, especially the people in the back. So don't feel bad if I'm like, just speak a little louder. But yeah, the FEMA districts are different. They're probably, the larger ones are pretty close, but once you get broken down a little further, they're pretty different. And so as an example here, these little light gray lines you can hardly see here are census blocks. In the 2010 census, they're basically defined by the streets on the ground. That was not always true before, and I'll get into that in a second, but currently they're basically streets on the ground. If a street is being bound by a couple different roads, if a piece of land is being bound by some different roads, it's probably its own census block. So your street, you have houses going down your side, the houses behind you, and on the side, that is a little block. And that is the base unit of population counts. It's that little block. How many houses in it can depend on area, where you are. Even size, like this here, this is right over this is the Allegheny County line, Washington County here. So this is a little more rural. There's not a lot of people that live here. These are roads, and this is probably all forest in the middle here, or farmland. So the sizes aren't very consistent. But that's not normally a problem, especially when you're dealing with populated areas, is where people live, people build roads, and those roads tend to only be so far apart. So the slightly darker line here is a block group. As you see, it contains a ton of different blocks. It can contain up to, I think, 1,000, although I've never seen more than a bunch. Not quite that many, maybe like 100 or so. And these block groups are just a way of organizing land a little better than these blocks. The blocks are really tiny, they're really difficult to deal with sometimes. So block groups are a compromise between those little blocks, and then what we have above them are the tracts, which are how the counties themselves are split. And so these tracts are slightly darker lines here, and then the county line is the super dark line that I write here. This orange line here is school districts, and you can see right here where this one school district is hopping right over the county line for a couple roads and then hopping back over right up here. Same thing with the, this pink line is the state legislature. This is the state senate boundaries. So that's defined right here. It also hops right over the county line, because why would anyone just do it at county line? That would make too much sense. Often for historical reasons, Census tries, again, to be reasonable about it, and while this doesn't look reasonable to us, like if you were analyzing that area specifically, the people who live there and how they interact and work, it probably makes a good deal of sense in how that's organized. So each of these blocks, each of these block groups, tracts, school districts, they all have IDs. It has to have an ID, have to have a name. And what we normally use are FIPS, Federal Information Processing Standard. And while this encompasses a metric crap ton of stuff, and for our purposes, just these IDs that we're looking at name these census blocks, census tracts. But not everything we looked at. So for instance, the state senate districts that we looked at in our previous slide, those are named by the number that the state gives the senate district, their state senate district. And as such, they fall outside of the FIPS IDs. And I bring this up for an important point. Should have put that a little later. But GNIS is Geographic Name Information System. It was created by the US Geographical Survey to basically identify places and things and other identifiers. And the census is pretty good about linking back to those identifiers. So if you have other data sets from the USGS, which encompasses a whole other set of stuff, they're my maybe second favorite government agency. You can tie them together fairly easily. So these FIPS codes are hierarchical fixed size segments. So the state is a segment, the county is a segment, the tract is a segment, and then each one of those things at the same level in that hierarchy have a different length. So tracts have a different length than a school district does. So the counties, we have voting districts, county subdivisions, census tracts. These all are different size. So whenever you're looking at a FIPS code, you can immediately identify what thing it belongs to just by its length. And that sounds arcane, but it becomes useful when you're looking at this stuff all the time. So just an example, this is the census block that we're in right now. It's defined by that road. I shouldn't sign the laser pointer outside, that's probably a bad idea. So it's defined by this road, the Boulevard of the Ally, I forget the name of the road up there, and the road over here. So this little section of area defined by these 4 streets is a census block, and it's 42,003,0103003,017.
Rolls off the tongue.
What?
Rolls off the tongue.
Rolls right off the tongue. I don't know why people don't use them more often. This 42 is the state, Pennsylvania.
Do these census blocks form a partition?
Yes. Unlike zip codes, they form a partition that covers everything. So 42 is the state, which is Pennsylvania. If you look at these codes, you'll notice that they're all even. The reason for that is the codes are alphabetical, And so there's room for inserting things if we ever add a state or a county gets split in two or something. It happens with towns sometimes, so it's not a really dumb thing for them to do. But so Pennsylvania is 42. Allegheny County within Pennsylvania is 003. So 42003 uniquely identifies Allegheny County. The yellow is the identifier for the tract within the county. This 3 here is actually supposed to be orange. I promise you it is if you look at my slides online. And this is the block group. And then these 3 digits at the end are the block identifier. And altogether, they uniquely identify that block. And then if we have a school district, this is Pittsburgh Public Schools, 4219170. Again, we have the state and then the school district ID within the state. And what I meant about these, turn that light off. What I meant about these being uniquely identified by their length. So 42 here, we have 003 for the county here, and then for the school district, which is part of the state, not part of a county or a municipality, it's 5 digits long, 19170. That's 5 digits long, and the state's 3 digits long, which means that everything underneath of the county cannot be 2 digits long. And if we look at it, we see that voting districts are 4 digits, county subdivisions are 5 digits, and tracts are 6 digits long. So none of those are 2, so you could never add something on to the end of a county and get an identifier that could be confused with a school district. And that is true for everything else down the hierarchy. It's a fairly nice system.
I actually think that's pretty smart programming. It allows you to use binary comparisons to identify what something is.
Yeah, it's a neat way of using a prefix tree, essentially. So you may be thinking, great, I know the ID of the block I live in. I can see how many people lived here in 2000. You're probably right, but maybe not so. These blocks can change over time. The tracts are defined for 1 to 8,000 people. The census doesn't like to abuse those endpoints, so they try to keep it in the middle. And so as population changes, and in this area we've unfortunately been losing population, those tracts get broken up and redistributed based upon where people live. And that makes analyzing them over time a pain. There are ways to deal with it, but we do have to be aware of this. And so one example is this tract here, right around where we are now. The dashed red line is the 2000 boundary, and you'll notice this black line going right through it is now splitting this tract, that 2000 tract, into 2 new tracts in 2010. Then up here, you can see these little dashed lines, which I foolishly didn't make thicker, I'm sorry. You can see these little red dashed lines here that have no black line under them. These were all merged together to make one giant census tract in 2010. So those are 2 of the changes. But then we can also get into something like this, where everything just changes, and in the end you have to just throw your hands up in the air. So this is up near Schumann Detention Center in the State Guard, if you're familiar with that, up in Homewood. There are houses down here that were, so let me take a step back here. This red line is the 2000 block boundary. These blue lines are the 2010 block boundaries. And as I said, in 2010, they really kicked it up in every road, even roads inside of cemeteries now define their own blocks. I'm assuming they didn't do this in 2000 and 1990 just simply because it'd be a pain to have computers of that era spend all of their time processing all of these blocks that have no living people in them. However, it's 2010, we have a lot more processing power. They decided to break everything down as small as possible, so hopefully moving forward we won't have quite as many problems. However, in an area like this, and there are a couple of these throughout the city, so if you are doing comparisons, so you have to watch out for them. This is just a mess, because this block gets split into a bunch of other blocks. However, no one lives in any of these areas here. One of these is a state guard. One of them is I believe, Veterans Employment Agency for training people, and the other is Schumann Juvenile Detention Center. So it's this really weird area. There's no one lives here, but a lot of people live down here. But like I was saying before, there are methods of trying to correct for this and help go from old to new. And this is almost all based around relationship files that are put out by the census. These relationship files, and again, the census is really nice. They give us tons of data. They tell us what blocks, what tracts used to be part of what blocks and what tracts. So they tell us how things relate, the percent area that overlaps between 2000 and 2010 for this, and in the case of tracts, the percent of the population, percent of housing units that were in this overlapping segment versus this other overlapping segment. So one way to do this is called areal interpolation, where you basically take the ratio of area that used to be there and assign that percentage of the population to it. So if you have this one tract that gets split into a 1/3 segment and a 2/3 segment, you basically say, well, the population of that tract was 600 people, so now 200 people live in the 1/3 segment, 400 people live in the 2/3 segment. However, this fails when you don't have an evenly distributed population. As we saw before, this was often done around parks, around wooded areas, so that 2/3 segment is probably now an empty forest or an empty park. And that 1/3 segment was actually where the 600 people lived. So when you're doing this type of analysis, you really do have to keep an eye out for if there are large changes in overlap and if things are being split very widely. And sometimes you can account for that. Like if it's being split into a park, you can just force it and say everyone used to live in the place that is now not a park. The other thing is for tracts, you can do based upon housing units. So you wouldn't have that problem if you're taking the tract and it's being split, because you could just look at the percent of houses. It would say 100% of the houses were in this little 1/3 segment, and you're good to go. However, it's not available at the block level, so if you're trying to do really fine detailed work, which, to be honest, you normally don't work at the block level. I do when I'm doing some of these interpolations and comparing things, but oftentimes when you're just looking at statistics, they're just too small to actually use or draw any conclusions from. You're normally working at the block group or tract level. So the census provides the percentage populations in the little overlapping segments. However, this fails if you have population that has metrics that are not evenly distributed. If you have an area with high car ownership, an area of low car ownership, or a rich area and a poor area, and you do an interpolation over that, it's just going to smear the average of that socioeconomic thing that you're looking at over the whole area, which may not be useful. So again, if you're dealing with large changes, this is something to be aware of. And going on to my next slide, sometimes you just have to throw things out. Sometimes you just can't make a good comparison between 2000 and 2010. It just, don't feel bad. It's not your fault. It just physically it can't be done given the data that we're given. Coming back to this is one of the areas where there's also some housing over here that was actually split into a different block and then put into a different tract. And then the population of Schumann isn't insignificant, but it's nowhere near the population of houses. And we were looking at this and scratching our heads, and you end up just having to throw it out and saying we don't have data for this area. Unfortunately, that happens. It doesn't happen so often that it makes comparing between 2000 or 1990 and 2010 impossible, but it is something to be aware of. You will end up with these regions that you just can't say anything about. So now that I've depressed you a lot with the not being able to, with how the census is organized geographically, we'll talk about how the data and the statistics that are collected are organized. So when we think of the census, there are two things we think of. The decennial census, which is the one taken every 10 years, and the American Community Survey, which is actually taken every year. It's a sampled sample statistic over the population. The census will send out forms, and then they'll follow up with some people and do a more in-depth survey. Currently, they make 1 5-year. They used to make 3-year averages, and what that means is, let me take a step back here. So the census is an enumeration, counts everyone, and census day is April 1st. So in theory, the census represents the population of the United States on April 1st of the year that it was taken. The American Community Survey, on the other hand, is sampled throughout the year. So they start in January, they collect data through December, crunch their numbers, and then release it sometime in August, September, and later in the next year. What this means is if you're looking at a statistic that could be seasonal, for instance, bike usage, if you bike to work, people who got this survey in the winter are going to say, no, I did not bike to work in the past 3 weeks. Whereas if you gave it to them in the spring, that same person would say, yes, I did bike to work in the past 3 weeks. So it can be a little more complicated to use when you're dealing with things that may be seasonal. And then the 5-year averages are essentially the 1-year averages but just over 5 years. So they start January 1st of 2005, and they stop collecting data December 31st, 2010, and then average all of that data for that entire time period. The decennial census tracks things such as age, race, and basic population metrics. The American Community Survey, as I alluded to, tracks some more detailed and interesting things. Income, commuting to work, if you own your house or if you rent your house, if you own a car, how many cars do you own, and more detailed demographics like that. But like I said, it is sampled, but they also give you their margins of error with those sampled metrics that they predict. Or not predict, but that they calculate. The decennial census is, you can get the data for the block level for all of the metrics. The American Community Survey is often at the tract level, although for the 5-year you can get some block level data. And the decennial census is what used to be known as the short form. It was a really short form because they don't ask a lot of questions. It's very basic things like race, age, gender, if you're living. And then the long form was, like I said, a lot of other questions, and it was only given to certain people. Now they've completely split those. The reason I bring this up is in the 2000 census, what we know as the American Community Survey is called Summary File 3. And after that, they decided to move to making it a separate survey that gets done on its own. And it's now called the American Community Survey. And it's kind of replaced that. So the census is now just the short form. And you should always compare the same survey against the same survey. If you're looking at numbers for 2010 in the decennial census, you should not then try to compare them against population metrics in the 5-year average 2010 American Community Survey. They're collected differently. They won't be the same. I guarantee you that if you looked at just this pure number of population, they won't be the same. So you need to compare the ACS against the ACS and the decennial census against itself. You can also compare, but you should also not compare a 1-year average against a 5-year average. You should always try to maintain parity in what you're looking at.
American Community Survey. So what you have described is the summary file version.
Yeah.
They also make available the survey responses.
Mm-hmm.
But those will be organized on a Puma basis.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah. So this is a description of the summary data.
Yes.
Characteristics.
Yes.
I'll let you cover that if you want.
I was thinking about getting Puma, but that kind of goes into even more detail.
Okay.
Puma is public use microdata area, right?
Right, and so the microdata, meaning individual survey responses, there's another geography called PUMS, which is 100,000 people approximately.
Yeah.
The reason you would use that is because you can do crosstabs. So every data, because you have the actual survey response, you can crosstab any response to any other response.
Mm-hmm.
It's 100,000, so you cannot say anything about any one person or any one area.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the responses aren't labeled back to like a block or a track. It's just part of that 100,000 group of people on the map. While we're talking about this, so if you're familiar with like Ancestry.com or something, you can go there, look up old census records, and like look at the sheets. Since I believe 1940, the raw census records of personally identifiable information are sealed for 72 years, which at the time was just over the life expectancy of a woman born that year. And so that's why Ancestry.com doesn't have more recent census records. They're sealed by law. Part of the reason for that is actually, just keep going down a windy path, to encourage people to answer. The census is supposed to count everyone, including illegal immigrants, aliens, everyone who's in the country. So the idea is by making it's, I believe, a felony for a census taker to reveal information about someone. It's also a felony to not respond to the census, although we do know that there are percent errors even on the enumeration that we take. And unfortunately, those percentage errors are thought to be larger on minority groups than they are on essentially white suburban data.
Is there an actual penalty for the not filling out the census?
Mm-hmm.
What is the fine at?
What about it?
The penalty for not filling out the census data.
I want to say it's like $25,000. It's pretty hefty. They want people to take it.
Yeah.
Do they ever find anyone?
What'd you say?
Do they ever find anyone?
I can't hear.
Do they ever find anyone?
I actually don't know. I didn't look into
I'll
it.
check.
Okay, so now that we know about this dearth of data, where do we get it? One place is American Fact Finder, which is a nice website that the census puts out, which allows you to select what geographic region you're looking at, if you want a tract, if you want a municipality, and what piece of information you're looking for. And it'll let you view that online, let you make a quick little map. It'll also let you download a raw CSV or Excel file with it. If you're just dealing with an area and a couple of different metrics, this is an excellent way to just kind of get exposed and grab this data. If you really are a data hoarder like me, you can just go to the FTP site and just download everything. Per state, it's tens of gigabytes. So it's in that weird, awkward place between I can deal with this and I don't want to deal with this. And then there are hordes of information and tons of documentation. As a programmer, and for all the programmers in the room, we can all learn a great deal from the census. Everything they do is fairly well documented. You can find information about how to use something, how something was made, and just how the intended usage of it. And in fact, in a lot of cases, they tell you how not to use it as well. They try to do a good job at making this data available and making this data useful, and also making sure that the data is not misused.
What format is the data in?
The raw data?
Yeah, the raw data.
Get to that in a second. So the geographic data that I was talking about, you can grab this from the FTP site. You'll need a geographic viewer such as QGIS, which is a free open source GIS suite I'll talk about in a second. ArcGIS will also work. And they also provide tons of information about what this data means, how to use it, how not to use it. As for importing the raw data, there is a GeoHeader file which basically maps lines in the data file to a place in the world. Those are still in a fixed width format. It's kind of annoying to deal with sometimes, especially because the data files themselves are in CSV files, although those CSV files have no headers. So what do? CSV files are named by the table that they're part of, and then you just have to go look up in all the beautiful documentation what fields are in the table, and it's just all sequential. You just name them with the identifier. For instance, the very useful Papa 016 Delta 003, and you're way to go. All this nice documentation also tells us that this is population by household, by age, but only people who are Asian, and only people who are 18 years old. That is what this this metric represents. This metric is this last number is essentially just sequential. So under 18 is 2, the total is 1, and if there was some other breakdown, it would just go right down the list if you're looking at them like in a spreadsheet. So you really can't take this and make heads or tails of it unless you actually have the conversion to what it represents. And since 2007, those geography files or shape files, before that it was tiger line file format, which was awkward to use, but they've upgraded and everything is now shape files. So if you're using Postgres, which I love and could proselytize to you about forever, there are a bunch of repos out there that will allow you to essentially just say, I want this survey, and it'll download it, import it for you, take care of breaking out that fixed width format geoheader file, creating that, importing all the data. They've already gone through all the documentation, given everything the proper identifier names, and done a good job. I believe that was Census Reporter, whose I linked there. And for people not familiar with databases, but thinking about using all of this data, given proper indices on the identifiers, even complex queries that involve geographic subsetting run really fast. It's tens of gigabytes is really nothing anymore, not for a database. So there are some other data sets that I said the Census puts out. There are over 130 surveys. One is the economic census, which tries to tabulate how much people make, how many people work places, where people work, how many goods are traded and sold, how much stuff it's going for. It's fairly in depth. It's not broken down into quite the geographic basis that what we think of as a census, the decennial census is, but it's broken down, I believe, into county or county subdivisions, depending on what we're looking at. There's the LODS, longitudinal employment housing dynamics, which tells you where people work, where people live, and what industry they work in. That is broken down into the tract level, I believe. There's the American Housing Survey, which takes stock of houses, how old they are, when they were built, what they're made of, the condition of them, if they have central air, if they have air conditioning at all, if they have heat, type of plumbing. Time usage survey, how people spend their time. Is it childcare? Is it leisure? Is it commuting? Are they working? Lots of other things. And rental housing, so rent, what is mortgage on rental houses? It's a lot of very useful information. Again, a lot of these aren't broken down into like the block group or tract level sometimes, but if you're looking at an area, they're still very useful metrics. And so some other tools. LibreOffice Calc, or the proprietary database of your choice for looking at small data sets. For example, things that you would download from American Fact Finder. You could load right into Calc or Excel or Numbers. PostgreSQL, if you're importing all of this stuff, I love it. I could talk on and on about it. QGIS or ArcGIS, if you are into that, can load in these geographic data sets. Stylize them, pull in data from a CSV file or pull in data from Postgres, and create choropleth maps based upon different metrics in the census. And if you're using Postgres to store that geographic information, there's PostGIS, which makes it a billion times easier. And so I hope I've conveyed some of my love for the Census Bureau. I really do think they're maybe the best federal government agency, followed maybe next by the USGS. But I really do love the Census Bureau. Thank you. Questions?
I was wondering, so you mentioned they have all these other surveys, and there are a bunch of other federal and state departments that do surveys.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's a kind of a wide variance, but does comparability exist in any way between like the economic census and like the Bureau of Labor's monthly unemployment numbers?
oftentimes there's a good deal of collaboration between, especially at the federal level, between those types of activities. A lot of those 130s surveys are things that may be administered by the census, but being funded by another agency. But in general, a lot of agencies do try to make it so that their numbers can be used together, although that's not guaranteed. So it really comes down to what two things you're trying to compare. Especially if you're trying to compare them over time, as I found out when I was trying to just compare race data over time.
What kind of things do you do with this data?
So a lot of what I do is actually working for an advocacy group called Pittsburghers for Public Transit, and you can probably guess what they do from their name. So looking at information such as how much people make, how many cars do people own, and overlaying that with the public transit data, the route data that the Port Authority is actually getting a lot better about this type of thing, and they just put out tons of data for usage. And overlaying that and looking at it and doing some analysis, seeing where possible areas where traffic was removed, not traffic, but service was removed from, that we may want to go and say, well, there's actually a need here, maybe we should try to lobby for service to be restored here, go and visit that community.
What's anything? Just have a comment to make then.
So has anyone been fined for not taking the census?
Not in a while. According to my2census.com, from the fine from not filling out the 2010 census is a $100 fine.
Oh, I thought it was a lot higher.
Yeah, I actually have something of that too. The fine for providing false information is $500, but they haven't enforced any of that. According, my2census hasn't found a single vehicle. Yeah, they haven't enforced that according to my2census. So. But the Irish has implemented a 25,000 euro fine, nothing on their census.
Maybe I saw that. That's weird. Oh, and for the techies here, just a piece of trivia. The punch cards that Jakarta developed for its looms was one of the first uses of encoding data for processing purposes, because I believe it was one of the mid-1800 censuses, I forget which one, but it basically took them 10 years to count the results, and you can imagine that in those 10 years the population grew, so they were kind of freaking out, and so some guys saw the Jacquard loom punch outs and built a system where he encoded everything as punches. If you were a white male under 18, you were punched here. He would basically slide the card under, push the thing down, and it would make an electrical connection, increment a counter for all of the different metrics that they were counting. They ended up being able to finish that census in, I believe, 3 years instead of the 15 or 20 that it was being projected to. Another fun fact, that is, I believe, one of 3 censuses in which we don't have the original records from because of a fire. So, maybe not so fun, sorry.
Kind of along those lines, what's the next big thing in census data you see coming? Are they going to all have handheld computers going?
Can you speak up? Sorry.
What's the next big thing in census data? Are they going to have it to the GPS coordinate where you're at and who's there? Or,
No, they the census actually tries to not provide personally identifiable information. They're actually not allowed to by law. This goes back to something else. I believe, if you're looking at block data, I believe there's less than 2 or 3 of some subset of some ethnicity. They don't include that in the data that they put out publicly. That will get included into the block group or track level, but it won't be done at the block level. They do try to anonymize the data as much as possible.
Is there a way to map zip code to this data?
Yes, so zip codes are a thing. Zip codes are not polygons. Zip codes are actually lines that postal carriers follow, which means that they intersect and they're not contiguous, which are not good things for a polygon. What the census is, also, you have to pay the USPS to get what zip codes are. While this all sounds very bleak, the census, being the wonderful folks that they are, basically took all of their returns and said, well, let's just like plot where everyone said that they had a certain zip code and draw a boundary around it. And they try to do that in a way that fills space but doesn't overlap and doesn't violate the laws of Euclidean physics, or Euclidean geometry. And so what that's called the zip code tabulation area, ZC Z Charlie Tango Alpha file, the ZCTA file if you go and look on the Tiger data set, the geographic data. And so you can kind of coordinate back to zip codes with that. You end up having to do some type of interpolation, most probably an aerial interpolation, because those can cut tracks or block groups in parts. But yeah, you can go back and forth, and they do provide you some more or less sensible representation of zip codes, because the post office won't, because it's not their problem.
What about metropolitan statistical areas? Do they fit in anywhere?
Yes, so they are, if I can go all the way back here, not what I want to do. Yes, so the metropolitan areas are defined at the nation level. I've not had a chance to play around very much with those. I'm assuming it follows a lot of the same general points that I've laid out, though. And this also makes sense because you can think of New York, which spans, which the metropolitan area of New York City would span state boundaries as well.
Yeah, in New Jersey for sure.
Yeah.
Is the information you've been giving us substantially documented on the Census Bureau website?
Yes, they have reams of information out there about all of this. While it's there, there's a lot of it. So that's why I was hoping my talk could highlight some of like the problem areas. And if you do need to, if you find that you're falling into that, it kind of gives you a hint of where to look or what to be prepared for if you're trying to do those types of analyses.
Are there any questions online?
No.
No.
We do have one watcher though.
Wow. Hi.
Thank you for watching.
That's cool.
Phil. Hey, Phil.
Hi, Phil. All right. Well, then I'm gonna ask everyone to once again thanks Jim, and I thank you for coming out. Welcome to hang out for a bit. I'm gonna be here myself, working for another hour or so. So I have no problem just letting you all talk to each other and stuff. So, all right. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you. You kind of just pull this out here?
Yeah.
Yeah.